Recording in progress.
Yes, Commissioner Jerome.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
And Chair Commissioner Randolph.
Yes.
And Chair Corn.
Aye. So moving on,
The motion passes unanimously.
we're going to go to our
Recording in progress.
number 6.1, which is a review of the meetings of January 18th. Is that correct? What's a question for Wendy?
Yes.
Okay. And basically, we need to accept those meetings as submitted. Is that correct?
I'm sorry. Pardon me. Are you going into the public hearing for item 7.1?
So the minutes, I have 6.1 as the minutes from January 18th. That's to approve those, correct?
Yes, and that was done under the consent calendar.
Okay, I'm sorry. So we'll start with item number 7.1 of the public hearing. Can I get a staff report, please?
Yeah, absolutely. This will be my item tonight. And Ruth, please hold on. I'm trying to promote you as well, but it doesn't seem to be working. There might be a button you have to click. And if not, I know we have Stacy on. Oh, there we go. All right. Well, thank you all for your time and participation this evening. I think we have all been waiting, maybe this sounds very nerdy, but we've been waiting for this night for a very long time. Very, very excited and honored to present the potential designation of the Train District, Sebastiani Cottage District, and the Broadway District as City of Sonoma local historic districts. And before I do my presentation, would love to introduce our consultants. We have Stacy Kozakiewicz and Ruth Todd from Page and Turnbull. You guys want to introduce yourselves real quick?
Hi, my name is Ruth Todd. I'm the principal in charge of this project, but I'm calling in to really learn what Stacy's going to present today. So Stacy, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Stacy Kozakiewicz. I'm a cultural resources planner and historian with Page and Turnbull, based out of San Francisco, and I am looking forward to following up Christina's presentation with a summary of the work that we've been doing in Sonoma.
Great. So I will be keeping mine hopefully fairly short because it is really Stacy's area of expertise and not mine. But these projects have been going on for quite a while. So the Train District was originally identified in 2016, and that was through the historic resource evaluation for the Masonavi Cottage. And for those of you who might not be familiar, the Masonavi Cottage is a beautiful City of Sonoma-owned cottage off of First Street East, right by Depot Park and the bike path. And it was gifted to the city from the Masonavi family and is a lovely event center. And I think this has a bunch of historical information there. And other people might be able to comment more about what is there, but you should definitely check it out. It's beautiful. But in that historic resource evaluation, it was suggested that there was a potential for a district based on associations of the train depot and the railroad tracks in the area of First Street West and First Street East. In November 2016, this commission, the DRHPC, expressed support for researching and establishing the train district to recognize and preserve a cluster of historic structures in Sonoma that are associated with the North Pacific Railway line. And in order to initiate that work, City Council allocated $7,500, and the City of Sonoma received a grant to support that funding. And we've really been pulling that together this last year and worked with Page and Turnbull to refine the scope. So all of that funding was really targeted for just the train district. And in discussions with Page and Turnbull, we were able to expand the scope to include a couple other districts that have been identified previously. So the Sebastiani Cottage District that's going to be discussed tonight was originally identified in 2002. This was in the environmental impact report for the Campobello subdivision, which is now called San Lorenzo Court. And it was identified then that the cottages collectively on 4th Street East together would potentially qualify as a historic district. And then the Broadway district as well. And I'll let Stacy elaborate on the Broadway district and what needed to be done. but staff and the Sonoma League for Historic Preservation and the Sonoma Historical Society have been working together over the last year to refine the scope and collect, really have sent all of our data in one central location, and working on some other initiatives to really bring some of our Sonoma history to the forefront and make it easier for everyone to access. The long and short is that these 3 districts have been found eligible for listing in the California Register of Historic Resources or the National Register of Historic Places. And the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission's responsibility for this process is outlined in Sonoma Municipal Code section 1942-020. This is in our Historic Preservation and Infill Development section of the code. And in order to designate a local historic resource or district, the commission needs to make certain findings, and there's a process that we have to go to. The first was having this meeting tonight. It was publicly noticed, and the commission will be making a recommendation to the city council, and that's where the process will be finalized, is at city council. So we're kicking off that process tonight, and the requirements for designation is that the district is geographically definable, that it possesses either a significant concentration or continuity of buildings unified by past events or aesthetics by plan or physical development. Considered as a whole, a sufficient concentration of buildings within the proposed district demonstrate integrity of design, setting, materials, workmanship, and association. The collective historic value of the buildings and structures in the proposed district is greater than the historic value of each individual building or structure. And the designation of the area as a historic district is reasonable, appropriate, and necessary to protect, promote, and further the goals and purposes of this section of the code. And so, as I mentioned, the action before the commission tonight is to conduct the hearing, discuss the findings of the report, and to make a recommendation to either wholly or partially or to disapprove the designation to city council. And so staff's recommendation is to recommend that city council adopt the Train District, Sebastiani Cottage District, and the Broadway District as local historic districts.
Very good, thank you.
Are there any questions? Before Stacy has a presentation as well, but.
No.
All right, Stacy, I'll kick it off to you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can make this work. Is this showing up for everybody?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Nod. All right. So the work that Page and Turnbull has been doing with the city of Sonoma, we kicked off in July of last year with a site visit to Sonoma to do a pedestrian survey of the 3 areas that Christina introduced you to, and just kind of familiarize ourselves with the landscape and photograph all of the contributors and non-contributors to these actual and potential districts. As you can see here, this is the Masonavi House, which is in the first district that I will introduce here, which is the Sonoma Depot Historic District, which is the district that really started off this whole process for us with the recommendation in the Masonavi Cottage evaluation document. What we found for this district is that there is a significant concentration of both residential and a couple of commercial buildings that center around the circa 1890 train depot location. Now, the depot building itself, as I'm sure you all know, is a faithful reconstruction of the building the original building that burned in 1976. And so that building itself is not technically historic in nature. However, the location of the district, the buildings that grow up around it, and as you can see really clearly on both the parcel map and the aerial photo, the shape of that little neighborhood, the alignment of the railway really kind of formed the way that the railway district interfaced with the city, which is, as you know, the plaza is located to the south of this district area. The boundary of the district encompasses both the depot property, but then also the adjacent properties where residential buildings and commercial buildings were erected between around the 1890 establishment of that rail station up until 1942, when the rail station really was decommissioned for use for its purpose. And we could fairly clearly associate the construction of these buildings, whether they be commercial or residential, and then used sometimes in some cases as small businesses, saloons, boarding houses, or hotels that could have been, that really served the passengers on the railway, as well as the freight business that the railway relied on. There are 12 contributors in the district. You can see those are highlighted blue. I'm going to move on to the next page too, just to show you the earlier Sanborn maps showing a little bit of what this district looked like during its period of significance. And it was a fairly open space. And so these 12 contributors that we have left, you can see the blue highlighted buildings on the Sanborn maps from 1923 and then the 1941 update show what had been constructed at that point in this district. And so I think we're lucky to have what we do have. There are residential buildings in folk Victorian and vernacular cottage styles. The 1-2-story residential building, which appears to have started off as part of a rooming house business, a couple of commercial buildings, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, the Depot Hotel and the Cooperage, which although they have been altered, can serve as district contributors, as well as that reconstructed Sonoma Depot and the surrounding open space around it. Buildings that are no longer extant, which were part of this rail landscape, include a couple of warehouse buildings that served the freight business at the railway. There was I believe a poultry warehouse up on this north side of the depot rail line, that and a couple of other buildings that lasted up until the 1940s that are no longer extant, kind of showing that industrial part of the rail operation. There are a few pictures of just some examples of contributors, a couple of the nice folk Victorian cottages, of course the Masonavi Cottage, as well as the Cooperage and the Depot Hotel. I think something to keep in mind when we're evaluating and deciding on contributors for districts is, in many cases, district contributors are resources that might not quite meet the threshold of significance or integrity to be individually eligible, but they can nonetheless contribute to the significance of a historic district as kind of a larger picture and an assemblage of buildings that contributes to the city's understanding of its history. So that's an introduction to the Sonoma Depot district. The next one that we went to, which was a little bit to the east, is the Samuel Sebastiani residential district. And the initial evaluation that was for one house within this district that brought it to our attention really focused on buildings on the east side of 4th Street, because they're quite recognizable kind of craftsman style cottages. And in our research and survey work, we identified that the district actually spreads a little bit onto East Main Street and a little bit around the corner to East Napa Street. Now, what these are buildings that were constructed by property owner, winemaker, cannery owner, and developer Samuel Sebastiani, starting in about 1920 and up until about 1935. These were operated as rental cottages, and so during the period of significance, for the most part, Sebastiani owned the properties, contracted the construction of these buildings according to fairly standard plans. And as you'll see when I show you photos, there are some pretty typical types of designs that were used. And so it formed a cohesive little residential landscape of these single family cottages that retain pretty good integrity overall. There are individual ones that have some alterations, but for the most part, things like their setbacks, their massing, they have fairly consistent streetscape elements, as well as little paved rear alleys that kind of work around. You can see this little pink alley here that runs behind this row of houses, which you can access by 4th Street East, really tie these all together as a fairly cohesive historic unit. Here's a quick look at what the map of this district looked like in 1941. You have one or a couple of buildings in here that are, if you look up 378, 390, and 391, these three on the corner actually predate that district. And so they're within the boundaries of the district, but aren't contributors. But these little buildings on either side of 4th Street, a little bit on Napa Street, and then of course one up here, 481, that has been moved around the corner as part of a more recent development project, but we still consider a district contributor because it was originally included as part of this development, and is still pretty much within the area of the original cottages. This gives a bit of a look of what these cottages look like. This is Sebastiani's house, which was really just an elaborate 2-story version of some of the more simple single-family craftsman cottages that are along 4th Street. As well, there are a few of these little colonial revival cottages, and some across the street opposite the kind of more typical craftsman style that have these really cute little shaped brackets. There are some examples like this kind of Mediterranean eclectic single family cottage that were all built on land that was owned by Sebastiani during the period of significance. So let's move down south of the plaza. The 3rd district that we reviewed, this was a bit of a different approach that we had to take with this one. So the Depot district and the Sebastiani district had both been recommended by historic resource evaluations for single properties, but had not yet been defined and didn't have boundaries defined. Those we both filled out complete sets of Department of Parks and Recreation, or DPR 523 forms for, that include a full evaluation and boundary definition kind of from the start. This was starting from scratch for defining a district, and we found them eligible for the California Register. The Broadway Street Historic District had been previously found eligible in 2002 for the National Register. Because it has been, now 20 years since that effort was completed, it was necessary before moving forward with a local designation based on that evaluation and finding of significance, to just update the contributors and make sure everything still was in the same place as before and looked relatively similar. And so our survey was not to start from scratch and define this district, but to fill out what are called continuation sheets that just update the information and the contributors for this district. And so what we have here is a pretty wide period of significance. This stretch of Broadway, south of the plaza and south of the little commercial stretch that is immediately adjacent to the plaza, was developed with single family homes in popular residential styles, starting in the earliest ones in the late 1860s and stretching all the way up until almost 1940. They share fairly standardized setbacks, street trees, usually sidewalks with little curb lawns, consistent landscaping along this stretch of Broadway, where south of it becomes a little less regular, it seems a little less dense, and more interspersed with commercial and institutional properties. And then immediately to the north of it, as we know, much more commercial in character. The findings of our survey were that, as you can see from this map, I have some color coding on here. The properties shaded this dark blue are the ones that were identified as district contributors in 2002 and that we found hadn't really changed. We compared what we saw in the field with photographs from 2002, as well as photographs from some earlier surveys in the 1970s, just to check that these properties maintained consistency. We added a couple of properties as well. 578 Broadway, which is at the north end of the district, is within the National Register Plaza district as well. And so there's a bit of an overlap here, but because it thematically associates with this residential district, it makes sense to also include and just have that little point of overlap. We also added another property at the south, which is a residential building that we're not sure why wasn't included in the initial district designation, but it appears to have enough architectural consistency and integrity with the other district contributors to fit into it. There were a couple of properties that are not contributors any longer. that have been demolished and replaced by contemporary buildings. And so these yellow properties are ones that are actually removed as district contributors and no longer are. There's one a little bit of a mystery building that was recorded as being a little single-story colonial revival in the 2002 survey, and now is a Queen Anne cottage that we're still trying to solve the actual story of, but for the time being, it can be a contributor, and it doesn't diminish from the district. But I'll sure be interested to find out what its story is when we're able to. This is a little overview of what the district looked like as of 1941. The blue properties are all of the properties that are still extant, that are district contributors, that were present at the time of the 1923 Sanborn map. The green properties are the ones that were built between the end of the 1923, between the time of the 1923 Sanborn, before the 1941 Sanborn. And just from the records that we have, those date between 1924 and 1939. And so those are our district contributors kind of in context of the time, that was the very end of the period of significance. And here's some examples of the architectural variety. This of course is the two-story house that the Queen Anne that is up at the very northeast end of the district, which is the one that is in that overlap area with the National Register district. And then we also have, a nice little Victorian cottage at 681. We have this more, later Tudor revival single family residence, and this, kind of very classic looking city of Sonoma vernacular one-story cottage as well with the hipped roof. And so, this is a one example or a few examples of the kind of buildings that are present within this Sonoma district along Broadway. I am glad to see that I actually don't really need this slide because Christina already went over it. I just was including a summary of the historic district designation process in the city of Sonoma, because all of these districts we believe have gone through the process of proving their eligibility. We've provided the full DPR 523 forms, both for the districts as well as collected forms for any previous evaluations that were done of these buildings prior to our work in the city of Sonoma, and given those as packages to Christina Tierney at the city. And so these districts are adequately documented and ready to be considered and hopefully recommended for addition to the local register. We have one last slide that just gives you an update on kind of our next effort and our next phase of work after the district designations in the city, and that is updating the local register with individual properties in the city of Sonoma that appear to be eligible for listing, but which had not previously been added to the local register. What you see on this map at the right is this gray overlay zone is the historic overlay zone within the city, which could be considered for some review purposes to be a historic district. All the little black dots are the previously included individual resources on the local register. As you can see, most of those are within the downtown core. A great many of them are already within the National Register district area. And so they are in an area that, for purposes of planning review, tends to have a greater level of protection for historic preservation concerns. There are also several resources outside of this historic overlay zone, outside of the districts that we just evaluated, that have been flagged or evaluated by the city or by the Sonoma League for Historic Preservation or Sonoma Valley Historical Society as being significant or potentially significant. And so we made a pretty concerted effort to review, starting with the city's public access GIS system, which has a couple of categories: this historic structure and local historic, the origin of which we're still trying to track down, but it gave us a starting point for then searching the Sonoma and Valley of the Moon survey with Department Department of Parks and Recreation forms completed starting in the 1970s and updated, some of them in the 1990s and some in the 2000s, to find properties that had been evaluated to a sufficient level that they could individually be added to the local register. So as part of this effort, we found 10 properties that so far that look like they could pretty much just be submitted for initiation of designation. We found 11 properties that look like they need a little bit of addition to the evaluation and the description to get them to reach that threshold to qualify as local register properties. And then 47 properties listed on the local GIS layer as local historic or historic structure, which have some historic character and have been identified as such, but have not, from the look of it, been formally evaluated by either the historical societies or through resource evaluations initiated through the review process for individual projects. And this even includes what look like a couple of small districts within the city that that could be evaluated and designated as part of later efforts. So that's just a kind of preview of the more recent work we're doing with the city of Sonoma, and looking forward to helping fill out the information that you all have to inform historic preservation efforts in the city. That's the last slide. As Christina said, the Sonoma League for Historic Preservation and Sonoma Valley Historical Society were just priceless in helping us, track down records and HREs and other kinds of documentation that has previously been done for properties within Sonoma. And so want to give a big thank you to everybody who helped from those groups. And if you have any questions, my email address is there at the bottom.
Very good.
Thank you, Stacy. And just a note for all of the commissioners, there is a letter from Patricia Cullinan from the Sonoma Historical Society supporting the recommendation this evening. So just want to make sure everyone had a chance to see that.
Great.
Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you. Thank you, Stacy. A very comprehensive presentation. It's nice to see bigger. I have two screens, a bigger screen that helps. So really, that's very interesting. I didn't realize we had so much outside the district. Are there questions for staff for Stacy? Does anybody want to follow up or have things they'd like clarity on? Okay, what? Mr. Randolph?
Yes. First of all, I just want to thank you both so much for your report and work. It's fascinating to stare at the maps really hard and try to figure out which houses are which. Beautiful photography and just your appreciation for town and for the historic resources here. Really appreciate that so much. I have a question that I'm just sort of curious about. When a district is designated as historic, what is the impact, if any, on the current residents of the district and or future residents of homes in a district that's historic?
Christina, do you want to take this, or from a planning perspective, or would you like me to?
I'll let you take that one, and I'll see if I can add on from the city's perspective.
Sure. Properties within historic districts, though they are not individually necessarily eligible for designation or individually designated, can be subject to potentially more restrictive design review to help maintain the character of the district. And so potential projects at a district contributor or even at properties that are non-contributors within the district may be required by the city to be compatible with the character of the district.
Thank you.
And if I could just add on a little bit. So in the city, we already have very formulated processes. When we are doing a development review, one of the very first things we do is look at the date of construction. And just based on that level, we will determine whether or not an additional level of review is required. If it's over 50 years old, we will most of the time recommend a historic resource evaluation. And what the historic resource evaluation does is it tells us if it is or is not a potentially historic resource. And so there's another step where if it is a potential historic resource, then that's where the additional design review level would come in, that the proposed project would also need to be reviewed and determined to be in compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards. And so we're already doing all of those steps throughout the city, and in particular in our historic overlay district. These 3 districts that we're discussing tonight, the Train District, Sebastiani Cottage District, and the Broadway District, those are all within our historic overlay. So it's not so much a matter of changing the level of scrutiny on any of these projects. They would really be going through the same process anyway. I think it's more a matter of just really trying to focus in on the uniqueness of these districts and just making sure people are aware that they're there. They're pretty fascinating.
I think to dovetail, just one last thing, following from what Christina was saying, as she said, these are already within the historic overlay zone, and so there is already a fairly robust review process. Defining these districts will help proposed projects and the people reviewing those proposed projects understand the context for what is going to be compatibility in each of these districts. And so an acceptable project in the Sebastiani Cottage district could be quite different from one in the Railway district, just because of their different periods of significance and slightly different character. And so it helps provide information to inform some of those decisions.
Yeah, and to tag on even more, the whole intent, one of the big intents with all this was for the city to do a lot of the legwork to identify potentially historic resources. So property owners that come down the line and want to purchase one of these properties, that they're aware from the get-go what some of the ramifications are. And a lot of our efforts outside the historic overlay are actually intended to streamline housing developments. There's a lot of new housing bills coming down the line. We have SB 9, SB 330, and you can't use those streamlined processes. There are historic resources on the site. And so what the city is really trying to do is to do as much of the legwork now as we can and to disclose to the public what these resources are and what some of the restrictions might be for these properties.
Mr. Stewart, it looks like you'd like to add a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know how to do it electronically, so I just pulled my hand up.
I saw you.
I'm old school, maybe for a bad reason, who knows. Stacy, could you talk a little bit, let the commissioners know a little bit about the Mills Act as far as one of the things that's available out there?
The city of Sonoma honor Mills Act contracts?
Yes.
No,
Wait.
no, not yet.
Okay. Ruth, do you want to talk about the Mills Act? I know Ruth has a greater deal of experience than I do, and so she's a good resource to have here.
Sure, I can jump in. The Mills Act is state enabling legislation that allows any of the local jurisdictions to provide to develop a Mills Act program, and the Mills Act program criteria can be established at the local level to allow homeowners, I think it's just residential homeowners. No, that's not true. In San Francisco, it's commercial and it has to be, back up. The local jurisdiction can decide what qualifies for Mills Act property, and the Mills Act property typically provides tax relief for a period of up to 10 years that can be automatically renewed, so long as the property owner, in lieu of paying taxes, puts together a maintenance program that rationalizes that their financial investment, instead of going to pay taxes, goes to the preservation and the continued maintenance of their property. And typically the Mills Act is not allowed for projects that are not considered historic resources. So it's actually quite a good, it's a robust program in many communities. And there are still some communities that don't haven't tackled the adoption of a Mills Act program because of the concern about the tax relief and or the lack of staffing or ability to monitor the maintenance promises that have been made over time.
Thank you for that. The reason I asked the question is because
I have a question.
a way to think of that is similar to the Williams Act contracts. If you're familiar with those, that's probably the best way to do it. And I'll visit with staff about applicability within the city, because clearly some of these residences within the districts could benefit from that. And similar to our Williams Act contracts, if you have an agricultural preserve area, then each of those landowners theoretically can be a part of that program. But as Rich was saying, it does require additional staff to administer and watch the monitoring of that over time. And like in the Williamson Act contracts, you can go through a process of non-renewal that over time, you would actually have your taxes graduate back. But we'll check back and get more information to you on that as a director's report later. But thank you for the answer to the question.
It is the best. It is the best preservation incentive that can be offered to a homeowner who otherwise may not qualify for other incentives like tax credits because they're tied to income producing property.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Commissioner Jeremy, you had a question?
Yes, I did. I noticed that the boundary of each district is very precise. What create that precision, and why not one more property over or one property less? What is that precision based on?
Right. The boundary is based on it, and it is you have it right that it is the property boundary, and each district has a specific focus that that is tied to its historic context. And so, on the Broadway district, for instance, at the east and west sides of the district are the rear property boundaries of each of those parcels on which the buildings right at the Broadway right-of-way are contributors to the district. Now, a lot of those parcels have got also rear buildings on them, and they're not visible from the public right-of-way. They weren't individually surveyed. It is the ones that are right at the public right-of-way that are considered to be the contributing buildings. That said, projects within any of those parcels that has a contributing building could potentially impact the historic integrity of the contributor. And so you would want to treat a project on one of those parcels in a similar way to how you would treat a project right altering one of those buildings themselves. So that's the rear property line. In something like the Broadway district, the edges of the district at the north end and the south end were really defined by a change of character along that district. And so at the south end of the district, it transitions into larger lot sizes, commercial properties, institutional properties that are just not consistent both in character and in age with what is inside of the district. And then at the north side, there is that fairly, if you're kind of walking along and if you could see the boundary, in your field of vision, you would see it transition from these residential buildings, mostly one-story, but some two-story residential buildings, to this kind of the two-story commercial storefronts that are right set up at the public right-of-way, at the pedestrian right-of-way. So in that case, there's a fairly distinct change of character. In the Sebastiani district, similarly, it is really where Sebastiani's property ownership ended. It is the group of parcels that he owned during the period of significance of the district and on which he built properties that we could find documentation of, at least. And so the kind of next adjacent parcels are later buildings. They were maybe not developed for quite a number of years after Sebastiani built those cottages. And so the parcels that are just immediately outside of the district don't have, they don't contribute to the district, and then the ones past them don't contribute, which is why you can sometimes have non-contributors wedged inside of a district when there is enough concentration on either side of them to kind of maintain that character. They might be infill, they might have been there before, but they have on either side of them enough enough actual substance of the district to kind of keep them inside of it, even though they don't contribute. But something on the edge, we can just, cut the boundary off there. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
And I have a question too. In the Sebastiani district, there was a couple of buildings. There's one specifically that's on the corner of 4th and Spain. That's like one of my favorite buildings in town. And you mentioned that it's outside of the, it seems like a historic building. It was prior to construction, or can you explain how those were included?
Is it one that's inside of the,
I think it was 391.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think, is that one that it looks like a bank?
The Plumstone building. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's earlier. And so the character of the Sebastiani district is, its significance is tied to an intentional development that that happened within a distinct period of time that has a shared context and a shared architectural style. And in this case, the shared ownership by Sebastiani and his initiating building those houses. That doesn't mean that building isn't eligible to be a historic resource just as an individual. It isn't consistent with the district. It was just there already when they built those cottages. It's a neat house though. I like it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful house. Has anybody made this connection here that we've had vacation rentals in Sonoma for a very, very long time?
Yeah.
That's what I was reading through. Like, wow, VRBOs go way back, right? Sebastiani did it years ago. So no, it's very helpful. Thank you. That clarity really helps. Is there any other further questions from Commissioner Randolph?
Yes. Actually, I think those rentals were to workers, were to vineyard workers.
No, I assume so.
We looked at some census records and documentation, and they were long-term rentals, but they weren't all workers at Sebastiani's businesses. It wasn't limited to his workers. So, because we had worked under that assumption to begin with as well, but it appears that they were open to general residents of Sonoma.
Interesting.
So a couple other questions. One, Christina, did I hear you say that design review of buildings within the historic district are not subject to the streamlined meeting requirements of SB 9?
Correct. Yeah, so the SB 9 ordinance that the city of Sonoma has passed, it does not include properties that are in a designated historic district, and that's in the SB 9 statute as well.
So maybe we'll address that in the later conversation tonight, but I'm curious about where design review for historic buildings in the district, if those would be in planning or here. So that's just for later. And then my other question is, I'm so excited about these 3 districts, by the way. I'm asking a lot of questions, but I'm just curious.
No, I love it. Thank you.
How will the districts be visually designated for folks?
That is a good question. So far, just what has struck me as one of the really important byproducts of this effort is how everything has been collected electronically. Page and Turnbull has done such an amazing job at collecting all our historic resource evaluations. So I think adding overlays on our GIS system is the first and easiest step. I think we need to probably get them on some of our City of Sonoma maps, and I'll let Stacy chime in if there are other efforts that we need to do.
I think for starters that really is a good effort, just to make it available online. So anybody who is looking at properties in Sonoma, anybody who's a resident of Sonoma, can see it as public information. And so it also is pretty clear to see the boundaries. On the ground, that really gets to be more of a question for property owners, because they are all privately owned properties. And so while the city of Sonoma can provide information about the districts, I think that to an extent, any kind of information, interpretation, commemoration of those districts has to include discussion with those individual property owners.
Mm-hmm. And how will those owners find out that they are now in a historic district if they weren't before?
We will be doing notice. So for this meeting, we did a notice a larger notice in compliance with state law in the newspaper. For City Council, we will be sending a specific notice to all of the property owners who are within the district.
Okay. I feel like I've seen in some other towns signage on the ground that says you are entering XX historic district. So
there are a lot of communities that have, you know, a change in color of their street sign or
Right.
an additional street sign that differentiates the boundaries of the district, which is actually, you know, it's a good education tool. It promotes civic pride and home ownership within a district. It's a little tricky if the boundaries are not block by block.
Yeah.
I think that's a great comment, and I will definitely think a little bit more about that. You know, what comes to my mind is our watershed signs. We have those, you know, come in the last few years that when you're driving, you know, when you're entering the Sonoma Creek watershed or the Laguna de Santa Rosa watershed. And I think as a planner, these are all really useful tools because it really helps put boundaries on everything. So when we're helping members of the public at the counter, you know, the first thing we do as a planner is to ask for the address, and we pull up the address in the system, and it's going to be a great tool for the planners and the planning department to help facilitate landowners through the process.
And I believe it hasn't been too very long ago that we redid all the street signage throughout the historic overlay. I mean, it's been in probably 5 or 6 years ago, and that's a big project. There's a lot of signs.
Chair Carpenter, just a thought. If it's the will of the commission, perhaps in your recommendation, assuming that you recommend all three, you could direct or forward a recommendation that there be some kind of articulation on the ground without necessarily specifying it. And then that way we could kind of work that out between now and going to the council, if that's where your commission would like to go. Certainly within your ability to make a recommendation like that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then we have to open up any public comments or anybody from the public. This is a Wendy question.
Yes, we do have folks raising their hands. So Patricia Cullinan, you can go ahead and speak.
Well, congratulations for all your efforts. I did have one question of the boundary of the train district, not including a property that's next to the Vintage House. It was a leather factory. The trains ran in Sonoma into the 1960s, and the period of significance of 1942, there was quite a bit of building around the trains. There was a plywood factory. Of course, Sebastiani had his siding that went into maybe the early 80s. And then, of course, there was that other property that, so could you please address why you chose that period of significance?
Sure. The remaining property is within the Depot Historic District now, although the period of significance does go into the early 1940s, predominantly date to the first decades of the 20th century or the very late 19th, at least in their style. And they relate to really the years that the Sonoma Depot operated as a passenger rail station as much as a freight station. The industrial areas outside of the district, predominantly to the northeast, have a bit of a different sort of spatial relationship to the rail district and to the kind of commercial center of town, a different time period of development. That leather factory, I believe, dates to the 1950s, and definitely different architectural styles. I think that there is definitely potential for a Sonoma post-war industrial district, which relates to that post-World War II period of sort of industrial development at what was that point just the outer north side of the city of Sonoma, that could definitely have a cohesiveness with a different theme. And so they're just sort of architecturally, temporally, not closely associated with the properties that are within the boundaries that we're recommending.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Are there any other public comments or written comments from the public?
Yes, Chair Cormany, Robert Demler would like to speak. Go ahead, Mr. Demler.
Thank you, Wendy. Chairman Gormley and commissioners, thank you very much for this evening. My big thanks to the city of Sonoma for spearheading this effort with Page and Turnbull. As you know, Patricia's group, the Sonoma Valley Historical Society, and I'm the executive director of the Sonoma League. We're composed of essentially volunteers, and you've done the work for us, and we're extremely appreciative, and we support your going ahead with this, and I would recommend that the commission approve this tonight. I also have two other comments. One is, I think it's a grand idea to have some sort of visual designation of these districts, certainly on city maps, to help the public become aware. And it's confusing to most of the citizens about the historic overlay and the historic district and so forth, but something with colors or whatever. And secondly, there's a conflict with realtors. I've always wanted to have some sort of sign off for people who are buying properties in these districts and want to come in and change things, and then we all have to gear up and do a lot of education, and there's sometimes a great deal of disappointment on the part of the homeowners if they could be aware. But I know the realtors do not want to put up any roadblocks, so it's a very fine line to walk. But anyway, essentially my comments tonight are to say thank you to all of you. Thank you very much.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Wendy, any other public comments, either written or participatory?
No, Chair Cormany.
Okay, I'm going to close the meeting to the public this time. So a little bit different than our normal meeting as far as proposing motions. Is that correct? Is there any other comments from the commission we'd like to run through this? I'd start with a roll and just go Michaela. Commissioner Randolph, do you have comments?
No, I think I've made my comments. I, again, totally appreciate the work of Page and Turnbull, and I'm been watching this unfold for years. So I'm happy that we are here tonight.
Mr. Johnson, I'd like to hear your perspective too.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Michaela. We've been, I mean, I haven't been here as long as she's been, but long enough for these things to start their development process. And I'm happy that we're finally getting to the end of it. Appreciative about the conversations of designation. Again, the street signs that we worked on downtown were one of the ways. I don't know if a flagpole or something, I don't know, but we should be able to have some sort of a on the ground marker that because people walk from downtown to Sebastiani Winery. I see it all the time. I live in the neighborhood, and just something that as they pass by to kind of get a little bit more appreciation of the area they're walking through, instead of just walking through a bunch of really nice homes. But and I live across the street from Masonavi, so I'm really happy to see the train district. And I will say one thing, and this is just because I live in the neighborhood. I'm not sure who the owners are of the Masonavi Cottage, or if it's a city, but the other day I noticed that some of the wrought iron railways out on the porch were now off and kind of laying down there. And I'm not sure if those are old and original or not, but it would be nice if somebody could go by and gather those up and put them somewhere secure, so that when that unit does get redone, that could still be a part of it. Happy about Broadway as well. So I am very positive about it. And I would just, again, as David said, I would also make the recommendation that we have some sort of a marker for all those districts.
And Christina, I believe, did you mention the city owns Masonavi? I thought I heard that somewhere in the conversation.
We do. We have a lease with the Sonoma League for Historic Preservation.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just hate if those things are very old, and they do look kind of old. I would, because those kinds of things end up being scooped up and you know sold again, you know, in stores. So antique shops and things. I would just hope that we could kind of keep everything.
And Commissioner Jeremy, I believe you had a question. I'll get to Michaela in a moment.
No further comment for me.
Okay.
It looks like Robert Demler is raising his hand. I think we would have to open it back up to.
Let me go with Commissioner Randolph, then we'll open it back up to the public. Commissioner Randolph.
I just wanted to follow with Commissioner Johnson that there are two properties that I think we need to make the distinction. There's the Masonavi house, which is on First Street, and the Masonavi cottage is behind the Masonavi house. So I noticed tonight a couple of uses of those terms, and I think we have to be careful not to mix them up because they're two completely different properties.
Thank you, appreciate that. I'd like to open the meeting back up for the public. We have a comment from the public, Wendy?
No additional comments.
Okay.
And Stacy, it looked like she was just doing a screen share of the two, the cottage and the house.
Yeah. The one that I just popped up there is the cottage.
Right. And that's what Chris is talking about with the wrought iron.
Oh, so that is not leased to the Sonoma League for Historic Preservation. I believe that's the city's.
Yeah.
So thank you. I will look into that.
Yeah. The house is the one that has the two.
No, and I would just like to say that it's really encouraging to be involved in historic preservation because the bulk of the majority of the time we've spent in this commission for a number of years has been design review. So it's nice to see this come full circle and do this because I think it's really important for the city to maintain that, having seen other places that have not and what's lost. So much appreciated. Thanks to Paige and Turnbull. Is there any other comments or conversation we'd like to have before we open this up to a motion?
Before we do that, Stacy and Ruth, if you guys are interested in staying on the next item, might be of some interest to you as well. I know you might need to leave.
So hearing that, I'm going to ask for a motion. Would somebody like to draft a motion? I know there's some suggested language in the agenda, if you'd like to have that as a starting point.
I will give it a shot. I mean, I would like to propose that we recommend to the City Council that they approve the 3 districts and that we also ask that they consider some sort of signage or what the word, recognition on the ground of each district so that those visiting our town can enjoy those areas as individual districts of history.
Okay. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, like roll call, please.
Commissioner Jerome?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Randolph?
Aye.
Chair Cormany?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Yay. It's really significant. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your efforts. Okay, moving on. We're going to agenda item 7.2. Can I get a staff report, please?
Absolutely. Oops. Oh, sorry, Wendy, you're next.
Thank you, Chair Cormany and Design Review Commissioners. This is an application for a new sign for Sotheby's International Realty at 793 Broadway. The project is just over a quarter acre, and it's located on the west side of Broadway near the intersection of Chase Street. The site's developed with an existing 2-story commercial building, a duplex, and a parking lot with 12 spaces. The project's located in the Broadway corridor. It's zoned commercial, and it's in the historic overlay zone, and it's zoned Sorry, it's zoned mixed use, not commercial. The proposed sign would replace the existing 14 square foot 793 Broadway sign. It's a one-sided, non-illuminated, and it would have an area of 21.13 square feet. The sign panel would consist of non-corrosive aluminum, and the lettering would be 9 inches tall. Copy on the sign would consist of blue paneling and white lettering. Here is a picture of the existing sign on the left and the proposed sign on the right. The proposed sign complies with all the applicable development standards, and the proposed sign face totals just over 21 square feet. It's consistent with the aggregate sign area allowable for the property, and it meets all the standards for monument signs. There would be one sign, it would be less than 12 feet tall and would not be located over 6 feet from the public right-of-way. So there are certain findings this commission must make in order to approve a sign. And staff's recommending that the sign be approved, subject to findings and conditions of approval. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the question if the applicant is present. I suspect not.
If the applicant is present, oh, yes, I
Yeah.
will promote them.
Very good.
So, see, Jonathan, you should be able to share your screen now.
Welcome, and we'd be happy to hear about your project.
Hi. Can you all see and hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, hello. My name is Jonathan So, and I am the Vice President and Managing Broker for Sotheby's International Realty, our wine country offices. And just to sort of, so you understand, this is a new location for us at 793 Broadway. But we are actually have consolidated several offices to move into this location. So a year ago, we decommissioned 25 East Napa Street, which was right on the plaza, and took away signage there. This week, we're decommissioning 27 East Napa Street, which sits just behind 25 East Napa Street, and took away signage there. And then scheduled for mid-March, we will be decommissioning 722 Broadway and taking away signage there. At 722 Broadway is just across the street and down about half a block. So all we're really asking for is for signage to replace what was previously signage in old locations.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any questions for the applicant?
Are you guys still on First Street too?
And we have a location on First Street, correct?
You're going to keep that one?
Mm-hmm. That will remain. And then there will be 793 Broadway. Those will be our only two locations in the town of Sonoma.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that. Are there any other questions from the commission to the applicant? No. Are there any public comments or questions, Wendy?
Yes, Robert Dimmler would like to speak. Go ahead, Robert.
Oh, thank you. Commissioner Randolph cleared up what I wanted to say. The Sonoma League has the Masonavi House on First Street East. The Cottage is on the alleyway behind us, and that belongs to the city. And we are hoping and praying that someday that sweet little cottage will look as good as our house, which is owned by the city, by the way, but we lease it from the city. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So that was in reference to the previous discussion. So back to this signage, are there any other questions from the public regarding the Sotheby's project? Seeing none. Okay, I'd like to bring it to the commission for discussion. Commissioner Randolph.
Thank you, Chair Cormany. Mr. So, thank you for clearing up the how you're moving and where your location is going to be. This seems very straightforward to me. The obviously the Sotheby's is going to be moving into that space, and so they need some brand recognition there. I think Sonoma's pretty used to seeing the Sotheby signage around all over the place, really, not only on the offices, but on properties that are for sale in town. I have no problem with the application personally.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Chair Cormany. Yes, thanks, Mr. Suff, for your presentation. Straightforward. I don't have any issues with it whatsoever. I actually think the aesthetics of the blue and the kind of weathered brown in the back of the building look kind of nice together. So I have no problems with the application as submitted.
Mr. Jeremy?
Thank you, Chair. Based on the staff report, I think the sign is in full compliance with the city ordinances and looks much better than the old one, so I have no problem with that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd have to agree in the consensus that I think it's going to be an improvement, and it's very straightforward. So the colors seem to work well and everything seems to be in order. So that said, there's no further comment from the public or anything. So we're going to close meeting public and put it out to a motion. Would somebody like to create a motion on this?
I move that we accept the application as submitted.
I second.
Okay, roll call, please.
Commissioner Jerome,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Randolph,
Aye.
and Chair Cormany.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So moving on, we're going to be going on to item 8.1, which is a big one. Get a little bit of staff background on this, or how do you want to approach this?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be the lead for this, and I could pretend that we planned it this way, but I think the two staff reports that you have seen this evening are like the perfect little introduction to, I think, what we see the future of this commission being. And so I just have a quick presentation. The staff report had a little bit of, the agenda packet had some information for everyone to look at ahead of time. I'm not sure how many had an opportunity to do so. But the discussion this evening is discussion, consideration, and possible recommendation to City Council regarding modifications to the city's design review process and the roles and responsibilities of the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission. I've got a little bit of background. So the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission is established by Sonoma Municipal Code, Chapter 260. And the purpose of the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission shall be to protect the architectural heritage of Sonoma, identify and preserve significant historic resources, enhance the visual character of the built environment, and promote excellence in town design and architecture through its review of projects in accordance with this chapter and other applicable provisions of the Muni Code. So it outlines what the composition is, requirements for the members. And this is the interesting part. The reason we're here is the third bullet. The City Council shall review the duties, responsibilities, and effectiveness of the DRHPC on an annual basis, commencing 1 year from the effective date of the section. I don't think we've quite done this on an annual basis, but we are doing it tonight. So that is what's important. So there's a whole lot of writing on here. And so this is not really a great slide, but essentially the duties and responsibilities are for the commission to review applications, to review the nomination of historic resources and districts, and to provide certified local government requirements of the National Historic Preservation Act. As far as development projects goes, it's really just the last couple bullets. So I included this busy slide because the majority of the time of the commission is focused on these last couple bullets, which is to conduct architectural review, conduct sign review, conduct the landscape review, and the demo permits. And so historically, the majority of this commission's time has been spent doing design review. So the way our code is written is that every project that requires a building permit, unless it's exempted, is required to have approval by the Planning Commission and or Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission prior to issuance of a building permit. And the way our code lays it out is there are different requirements by development type. So we have specific requirements for residential development and for commercial and mixed use. And there are also different levels of review that are required for projects that are inside or outside of the historic overlay district. So for example, for residential development, the code states that design review shall be required for new residential development, the alteration and enlargement of existing residential structures and residential accessory structures as set forth in the table. And then the table is kind of like a checklist almost, if it's inside or outside, and kind of what the triggers are for design review. And for commercial and mixed use, it states design review shall be required for new commercial and mixed use development, including public and quasi-public facilities, and the alteration or enlargement of existing structures as set forth in the table. And we can go through the table if there is interest. It's pretty busy, so I'm going to skip that for now. So we discussed this issue at the joint design review and city council meeting maybe a month ago. I think it was in January. And staff has done some research on adjacent jurisdictions to inform this process. And the four that we look at on a regular basis for zoning code amendments are Healdsburg, Calistoga, Novato, and the city of Napa. The reason being their size, their proximity, and just general similarities to the city of Sonoma. And I have to say, personally, I was actually shocked. So it looks like most of these other jurisdictions have gone through a similar process already. You know, back in the day, everybody had design review commissions or DZAs, things like that. As it stands now, Healdsburg does not have a design review commission. They separate it into major and minor projects, and this is a pretty common theme. A minor project is approvable by the planning director, and the director almost in all the cases has the ability to kind of punt a project up if they deem it is worthy of a higher level of review. A major project is reviewed by the Planning Commission. In Calistoga, again, no design review commission. Minor is reviewed by the director, major by the Planning Commission. Novato actually does still have a design review commission. So they have their two tiers are major and minor, but the minor would be for the planning director and the major is for the design review commission. And appeals can be made to the planning commission and city council. And projects that would also need to go to the planning commission have a sequential review, similar to our current one, where they're heard by both. The city of Napa has no design review commission, and they have 3 different levels of review depending on the project scope. So some smaller projects are reviewed by the director, medium level projects go to the planning commission, and large commercial or complex projects or large subdivisions are reviewed by city council. Similarly, I did some research on historic preservation commissions, and it was really interesting, just sort of the spread of the jurisdictions that have historic preservation commissions. None of them are very representative in size of the city of Sonoma. Sorry, the font on this is not amazing. But the ones that really popped up are San Francisco, Sausalito, Carlsbad, San Diego. The city of San Diego also has one. So in San Francisco, the Historic Preservation Commission is a 7-member body that makes recommendations to the mayor, board of supervisors, and city departments. They recommend buildings and places that are historically or culturally significant. And they have a subset that is called the Architectural Review Committee, which is a subset of a 3-member subcommission of the Historic Preservation Commission that acts on some design review items. Sausalito, the Historic Preservation Commission reviews applications for exterior renovations of historic or noteworthy structures, historic sites, or landmarks in Sausalito. And they make recommendations to the Planning Commission for historic sites, landmarks, and districts, and they advise the City Council. That is a 5-member body. And Carlsbad advises the City Council and Planning Commission. They make recommendations for designation of historic landmarks districts, are responsible for maintaining the historic resource inventory. And it looks like they do some education and outreach as well. So the purpose of our discussion tonight is to really hear from the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission about your experience on the commission and what items you feel are might be worthy of continued review by this body. We can consider joint meetings, scheduling a joint tree committee meeting and design review committee meeting next month. Lots of topics to discuss this evening, but really just looking for kind of a roundtable discussion, and our end goal is to potentially and hopefully have a recommendation from the commission about their future roles and responsibilities. And I think that, the first presentation about the historic districts is a great example of some of these initiatives that have been kicking around that we would really like some additional help and manpower, and that if we do have a historic preservation commission, we would really like to use that commission to focus on these efforts.
Christina, this is David. Could you talk to the commission a little bit about options that they may have should they wish to retain the design review and the HPC components?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different levels that we can discuss. So our hands are really, as a planner, our hands are really tied from these planning bills that have come down from the state. So for example, for SB 330 applications, anything where we are limited to those 5 meetings, maybe the commission wants to make a identify that for those projects that are going to the planning commission, maybe they wouldn't participate in that level, but for maybe a design review inside the historic district or things like that, they would want to retain their review.
That's a lot to consider. Ooh, okay.
Yeah, I think kind of a great starting point, perhaps in January, it seemed like there was a resounding consensus on sign permits. And so that might be a good place to start, is which projects do you feel don't warrant your review and should be done administratively?
Okay. Mr. Randolph, I saw you have interested in making some comments.
I was going to make a comment. It's not about sign review, but I'll just throw a comment out here. So I did read the documentation from today, and I read the recommendation. I think it's recommendation from staff about how to move forward. And I was just going to add that I don't know if it's a recommendation or it's just comments about changing roles and responsibilities. But one thing I was going to suggest in that verbiage is that instead of the way I read it, it sounded like the entire reason for changing roles and responsibilities is to save time. And I think there should be messaging that's at a higher level, that perhaps increasing efficiency or whatever is going to result in a better result. I think saving time we're sort of stuck with that because of everything we learned at our last meeting. But I think saying that makes it sound like so far time has been wasted, which I don't believe it has. And I also still wonder how time is going to be saved if a lot of these responsibilities are moved over to the Planning Commission. These questions are still going to need to be addressed, discussed, and whatever. And so I hope it saves time and is more efficient and results in better outcomes. But I still not sure about that. But regardless of that, I would recommend that the wording for all of that kind of rationale focuses more on better outcome rather than saving time. I mean, I think we're all here because Sonoma's special. We want to, I mean, clearly, I'm kind of surprised there are not review commissions on other towns nearby us that you showed us. But that's maybe identifying an opportunity for Sonoma to retain its distinction as a historic community. I was trying to think of what are communities that we super admire, and what are their conditions. And while you were naming them off, I was like San Francisco, Sausalito. Anyway, so that was my one question about, or comment about wording in the document. And then other one was what you've already raised, and I'd like to hear the rest of the commissioners talking about, for properties that are within the overlay or in the new districts, what happens to those design review responsibilities?
Can we hold on? I have a technical question too. We're talking about doing this as a round open conversation. Would we like to do this and then open up to the public, or would we like to go to the public as we're going along, or how do we incorporate that? Because I see, like, David, you have burning
I
desires.
think, Chair Permany, you could have some general discussion or questions of staff and then open it up to the public.
Okay.
If I can just make a quick comment about SB 330, clearly that is the messaging that should be occurring, not the saving an hour here or an hour there. It's clearly in 2019, the Housing Crisis Act was passed, which limits not just Sonoma, but all jurisdictions in California to 5 meetings on a project. And it only relates to residential. So, the DRHPC could say, hey, great, residential projects will treat those differently that come under the auspices of SB 330, and everything else those go to the Planning Commission, because that way you don't get a meeting at the DRHPC, the tree committee, the Planning Commission, and then the council might have just 2 times to cut at it. And when there's projects of substance, you might have 2 meetings at the Planning Commission, 2 at an appeal, and then more at the council. So the concern from a staff perspective was just SB 330, which relates to residential. So hopefully that kind of plays into some of your conversation tonight. But clearly, that's it's not a gun at the head, but it's something we have to be very conscious of. Thank you.
And if I could just tee onto that, I think that, some of the messaging on this initiative has been a little bit blurry. I think I speak for all of us that at a staff level that we're incredibly grateful. I've personally loved working with this commission, and I don't look at this initiative in any way, shape, or form as we want to get rid of the commission. I think we're looking at this as we've been doing things this way for a really long time, and there's been some new state laws, and let's have a discussion about how to maybe do things better.
Agreed. Can you just confirm, Christina, that, and I just want to be clear, so if it falls within the historic district, it does not fall under 330, is that correct?
Let me pull up SB 330 and check that.
I can tell you the SB 9, that's the legislation that says SB 9 does not apply to historic districts, along with 9 other types of things like wetlands and mitigation hazard areas and the like. But the Housing Crisis Act relates specifically and only to residential projects. And it doesn't define whether they're in historic districts or not, I believe. So Christina, if you want to check on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll double check. I believe there is provisions that you can't use it if there are historic buildings on site, but I'll check.
Yeah, to me, that's a key component, because it seems like most of our attention are we beholden to the 5 meetings rule in conjunction with historic districts or not is significant.
And there's a lot of options for dealing with that 5 meetings, like the joint meeting that we're going to try out next month.
It's helpful. Yeah, and I would just say open conversation that a lot of the conversations we do a lot of sign approvals, and usually that could be a staff task, I think, if we're trying to eliminate some of this, because I mean, mostly it's subjective, it's compliance things. I think as far as personally, I like the comments about colors and architectural and the bigger scale things than signage. So in my opinion, that might be something we could easily shift to staff. I don't know how other commissioners feel about that. But I feel like there's a lot of that seems like we do a lot of that. And we haven't, I really enjoy actually having this meeting and providing some more concrete focus on historic, because that's really what I think is important personally. Commissioner Johnson, do you have any comments?
I'm still wrapping my head around all of this because I've been on this commission and it's been this way for so long. But yeah, I mean, I totally understand the reasoning behind it. And I just would hate that in the efforts of streamlining and making things less complicated, I guess, that, you know, we lose the passion that most of us have on things that are decided about in the historic districts and the historic overlay, in all aspects of it, because the focus is to make sure that, you know, we're maintaining this historic value. So I'm curious to see how the purpose that Christina read, you know, in the beginning of the presentation, that little paragraph, I guess it's interpretive, but you know, how that changes with us relinquishing some of the duties that we have, because it's well, but in the end, you know, I would just hope that we are careful and we don't necessarily rush, but I know that there are constraints, and you know, we have to work around those. I like the idea of joint meetings if that helps cut down some of the overall meetings so that they can, you know, maintain that number. But you know, I want to, I guess, hear more about how we, you know, how we maintain this focus that we've had on doing things to help.
David, let me come back to you just for a moment. Commissioner Jeremy, do you have an opinion or express how you feel about this situation?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, please. I was looking at this item mostly from the processes and procedures point of view, which I think is the concern of the staff and everybody else. There are items on the agenda that I have seen so far as the newcomer to the commission that sometimes I wonder why even they are on the agenda. A good example is the signage that we just reviewed tonight. Every element of that signage was in conformance with the city code's rules, regulations. And that's what makes me wonder why we spend time reviewing that. The same thing with minor modifications to the buildings that are not historically significant. And there have been a few items of that I have personally witnessed in past few months or over a year. So all of this from procedural point of view tells me that there are room for improvement to streamline the process without compromising the quality of outcome. And staff are those who are putting the agenda together. And I think what is administratively possible, as again, such as that sign that we reviewed today, I would think that it shouldn't be on agenda at all. And if there is any doubt in the planning department mind about any of those, I think a call for a joint meeting could really significantly improve the process. And generally speaking, I mean, wholeheartedly for streamlining the process and cutting the steps that are not necessary in reviewing any application. But on the other hand, I think we need to really collectively benefit from everybody's expertise, experience, and passion to move the process forward in a very efficient way. So for that, I'm all for a streamlining, but I think we need to really be very careful how we define that streamlining and how we invite the participant to participate in a meaningful way.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
Does staff feel that if they had more control to do things administratively, as Commissioner Jerome just said, I mean, if things are, already done, submitted to the satisfactions of code, that they can just be done over the counter, would that help lessen not only their work, but the amount of meetings that are done?
Yeah, I'll let Wendy chime in on this too, but I think for us, that is a big component of it is the workload that for every project that we process, in order to bring an item to hearing, we have to write a staff report, get it uploaded and set in the system. We have to get each of the PDFs and save them in the right manner and get those uploaded. And when I worked at Marin County, for instance, design review was just a one-page approval letter. And so that took about an hour, where I would say a hearing project is at least 6 hours of work, including attending the hearing and writing all the approvals and uploading the staff reports, things like that. So it would be a cost savings to the property owners as well as a time savings. And it would free staff time up to work on other items like the historic train district. But Wendy, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, that was the point I was going to make. I was using the previous agenda item for that sign as an example. I spent at least 3 hours on writing the staff report, and planning director needs to review it as well. And if we could have just approved that administratively, it would have saved the applicant, I think it's $311. And
yeah.
Also, I was.
Hold your thought. Go ahead, Wendy.
Also, I was thinking, it takes a lot of staff time when we have projects that go both before the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission and the Planning Commission. Like if it's a design review, exterior modifications, and a use permit. It would save the applicant money and time if he or she could just go to one commission meeting. So you might want to consider, if a project was subject to both design review and a use permit process, that the Planning Commission could do both of those reviews. Just something to think about.
Mr. Shore, tell me, in your previous experience, you've been with other jurisdictions, I'm assuming, and how was it handled there? How's it different? What was your impression when you came here and saw how we were doing things? I know there was some changes you instigated right away based on that, but tell us a little bit about your perspective.
Well, I'm going to give you, thank you for that. So I've worked it both ways, where I've been in a jurisdiction where there was one and then it was removed. And I'm talking about a separate situation where there was one planning commission, and then we created a historic preservation commission that had all land use control, which included design review, use permits, and the like. Then I've worked in one jurisdiction where they took all of the architectural review away and just had the planning commission do it all. So I've seen it multiple places. I will tell you that having an architectural review committee doing design review actually helps staff from the perspective of you can support staff and make the finished product look better, because we as staff get to arm wrestle with applicants all day long, and they may not see it eye to eye, but by the time they get to your body, there's another filtering process, if you will, and the end product turns out a little bit better. Not to say that we as staff couldn't try our hardest at the staff level. When the applications are like sign permits, they're generally not that tough. It either complies with the code or it doesn't. The only question is you're looking at whether it's a blue background with white letters or white letters with blue background, that kind of a thing. I'd like to suggest that we don't do over-the-counter permits. That would be a problem. I think if we create an administrative process for some of the simpler things, that would be helpful. And that gives staff time to then kind of put them in the queue with everything else that we have to deal with. One piece, two comments about what was said earlier. Number one is SB 330 does require or allow for automatic approvals if we fail to do it within the 5 meetings. So that's a problem there, and we don't ever want to get to that part in our city, because then we are up against it. So that's what we're trying to be protective and very protective about, to make sure that we don't put ourselves in that jeopardy where the council cannot ultimately have a final say, because we've used all of the 5 meetings prior to getting to them. And we know that items do get to the council from time to time that deal with land use matters. From a staff perspective, it would be helpful to hear a discussion about the things that I think Christina itemizes, probably about a dozen or so, maybe more than a dozen. And, more time of your commission is spent dealing not with the fun stuff that we were doing earlier tonight, talking about the creation of districts and things and nominations and the like. When I looked at that first set of 15 things when I first arrived here, I thought, that's way cool. But you really haven't spent a lot of time in my being here on those very things that are there in the ordinance. And, there is no priority there. I don't think there's from 1 to 15 or whatever, that number 1 is the most important. It's just, how do you blend that? And what I've seen is a preponderance to do current projects. One jurisdiction in Sacramento actually has 2 planning commissions. One is project review, and the other one is policy review. So maybe there's some kind of hybrid there as well. I don't know. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That's helpful. Wow, it's a lot to. Commissioner Randolph.
I know. So just a question. So these are all super helpful comments. And that makes total sense what you said, Wendy, about the time it takes to do one sign approval. That seems pretty ridiculous, actually. But so what would happen if if I'm understanding this correctly, we follow all the rules for making sure that we never get into the situation that David just explained about where there's like an automatic approval. But if I heard it correctly, for properties in a historic district or a historic property, those properties do not need to comply with that 5 meeting rule. What would happen if this commission kept that design review responsibility along with the fun stuff, as David said, the fun stuff around the historic districts? Is that an option?
So let me respond to that as I understand it, because David, correct me if I'm wrong, the SB 330 applies to all residential, including historic, so we don't get an automatic out of the 5 rules.
That's what Christian was going to check on, and I'm going to do that as we speak, because I don't recall that. But,
so Commissioner Randolph, that would be great, and I agree with you. That would be a good use of our time, that we could concentrate on those efforts, but we're not 100% certain that that's entirely the case. There was some consideration that it might be, if it's in a historic, it may not be subject to it, but we're not certain on that yet. That would certainly make it clarity for us, because we could say if it's within historic district, we're going to do design review historic, and that makes a lot of sense. And then outside of that, we can limit our responsibilities to make sure we streamline the number of meetings. I doubt, knowing public policy, it's that clean, but we'll see. Hopefully, maybe.
I'm taking some notes and summarizing just as everyone's going along. So far what I have is to recommend to the City Council to amend the roles and responsibilities to potentially delegate sign permit approval to staff, create a minor design review process for modifications to residential development outside the historic overlay, delegate design review authority to the Planning Commission for applications that require other discretionary permits, to create a streamlined review process for SB 330 projects, to retain design review authority for all mixed use and commercial development, all development within the historic overlay, and maintain authority for designating historic districts and resources.
Okay. So go ahead, Wendy.
Sorry, I just wanted to I think to ask if now would be a good time to go out for public comment.
I was just going to say the same thing, because I see
great
Patricia Cullen has been sitting here patiently, and I'm sure she has some wise thoughts to share with us. So I'd like to open up to any public. Is there anybody who would like to make a comment from the public?
While we're waiting for that, I just wanted to let you know that Commissioner Randolph is having some technical challenges, so she's going to try to pop back on if she can. But at this time, Robert Dimler would like to speak. Go ahead,
Okay.
Robert.
Please.
Thank you very much again, Commissioner Gormley. A couple of things. First off, Sonoma is a special place historically. The city comps that were used, some of those do not rise to the level of historic significance as does Sonoma. I would say our comparables would be San Francisco, Monterey, Santa Barbara, and San Diego. Those, not the others. And way back when, I can't remember how many years, there was the great push to have Sonoma designated as a certified local government. I don't know if that's still in play. I haven't heard that term in a long time, but Sonoma met the criteria because of the historical survey data that the Sonoma League maintains, and the city did accept certified local government status. And at the same evening, I made the recommendation. I'm not sure if a citizen can make a recommendation, but whatever. I brought up the subject to please rename your commission from design review to design review and historic preservation, as most of the items you were responsible for under certified local government were really historic preservation items and not design review. So I'm sympathetic that I know the staff does all these reports, and some of that could be certainly streamlined if we go forward with this process. I would say anything that's in compliance. I mean, in banking, I was a credit examiner for a long time, and there were compliance items, and there were legal items, and then there were judgmental items. So anything that's compliance that the applicant meets certainly could be approved administratively and a report sent once a quarter or whatever to wherever it's of interest. But your design review historical preservation committee could drop the DR and go with historical preservation, because it would create a really more accurate focus on what you do and what some of us want to see in the city of Sonoma. It's a bit of transparency, which is important, and it also involves the citizens for their comments, just like I'm doing now. So I think that you should go forward and divvy up the work that's just pro forma, meets criteria and whatever, but you have a great responsibility to the historic districts and overlay, and you've just created 3 new ones. And it's very important that we track everything in those districts and give people a chance to participate. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm old. I'll be repeating myself if I go any further. Thank you very much for allowing me to say that.
Some very valid points. I appreciate some of the history and background. It's more than welcome. Are there any other comments from the public? I see a hand raised.
Yes, Patricia Cullen would like to speak.
Go ahead, please.
Go ahead, Patricia.
Oh, might have it. There we go.
I needed the blue button. I support what Robert says, that historic preservation is very important in Sonoma, and everything that your commission can do to further that is important, not only in the short term, but these are these bills are going to be around for a long time, and you know, the 50-year rule for housing to become historic is you're going to have a lot of work and a lot of energy you could put towards making sure that historic resources were continually listed, registered with the state or the national government, and provide a real boon to the community. So that's it.
Thank you. So it's a very interesting point you're saying, and I'm kind of paraphrasing or considering what you're saying, that you're saying that a lot of our building stock is going to enter that 50-year window shortly, and therefore we're going to likely have more conversations regarding historic. Is that one of the points you're trying to make?
Absolutely. Oh, where am I?
It's a great consideration. Appreciate that. Any other comments from the public or anybody out there? Wendy, Christina?
No, Chair Cormany.
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to close the meeting to the public and bring it back to the commission. I'm not entirely certain what our objective is tonight as far as what we're trying to determine. Maybe Christina or Wendy could help a little clarity on that.
Ask the director, Storer, are you hoping for a specific motion this evening, or do we just need to have discussion tonight? He's black.
Well, I think that the intent was to have a recommendation that we could present to City Council, but it's not. There's no timeline.
One of the challenges I see is there's a variety of ways you could split this. You could have supporting subcommittees. You could have individuals from this committee join other commissions upon request. I mean, it seems like there's been a number of different structures have been presented that's kind of outside my expertise for sure. So I kind of relying on you guys a little bit to say that we think this might be a good suggestion if we fill in the blank, and then we could maybe discuss whether that worked for what our consideration were, because I think there's so many different ways to slice the pie. I'm not sure where to start.
Yeah, Chair Cormany, what we could do is, I think tonight is good to have a beginning discussion, because I think it would be not necessarily hasty to just make it all gone tonight just because we want to. I think if we take the feedback that we think we've heard, we can come back with a more consolidated recommendation at your next meeting. I don't think the council has a timing that it's got to get this done. I think we want to do it deliberately and make sure the pieces work. So I think we've heard a few things.
I think one of the things that's been very helpful for me, and actually a bit enlightening, surprising, to see how some other local, I mean, Healdsburg, I'm surprised. Sausalito is more in line with what I'd expect. In San Francisco, I've done a lot of work in San Francisco. I know all about that. So, I mean, there's definitely some models to look at as far as this works in those regions. And I also believe in utilizing all of our time efficiently. I mean, we're volunteer, but we still have a role here, and we're important. We're doing this for a reason. It'd be nice to make sure that that effort is concentrated and we're doing what we need to be doing. So my goal would like to see some form of, we suggest that here's A, we could do this, this, and this, B, and a couple of different things that we could discuss, future design considerations, what it may look like, from staff suggestions based on what you know from other situations. And then we could look at it and say, this makes sense for how we perceive it, or maybe this is a better option, or have a little more. To me, I understand it's just starting the conversation, but it's so hard for me to wrap around my idea in my head around how many options there are, what the structure could be like. It seems like there's a lot of potential possibilities, and I'm not sure we're ready to have any forward motion on any of that at this point, personally. So anybody else have comments on that? Any commissioners feel the same way?
I agree. You know, as it's been brought up, I mean, I don't think we should be wasting our time on, you know, the Rite Aid sign on Maxwell Village, you know.
Yeah, agreed.
I would also comment that it's good to know that joint meetings count as one of the meetings, like that is an yes, there are many options, but not millions of options. And so that's good. Also, I appreciate that we've looked at neighboring towns that are and their approaches to things. But I also want to say, do we love what's going on in Healdsburg? Do we love what's going on in Napa? So, you know, maybe there's an opportunity to pick some other communities. Although you did, Christina, you did point out San Francisco in your San Francisco list.
Yeah, that focus was really more on the historic preservation, but I really appreciate Robert Demler's comments about looking at San Francisco, San Diego, Santa Barbara, and Monterey. I think that's some great direction to us to get some more information.
Oh, good.
Also, I was chatting with Stacy from Page and Turnbull, and she offered to chat at their staff meeting about some potential options for us. And she sent me some links to take a look at. So I've got some follow-ups to do.
That's awesome. And you know what? I had tech problems and my computer bounced me off probably right during Robert's comment, because those were the communities I also wrote down. But this is a rich conversation. I really appreciate everybody's contributions tonight and from all different perspectives. And these are the kinds of conversations that we need, I think, to go forward with a thoughtful response.
One thing, David, I want to also remind that we've got two commissioners that I know have would be very opinionated and like to contribute that aren't here today, so that they're not here to contribute to this conversation. I know they'd like to have some input on it. So I want to remind that will further the discussion as well. David, do you have something you want to add?
Yeah, and I think what we could do is also follow up on SB 330. If the chair is willing, I've got a few slides. I've been kind of going through it. I don't think the historic district has been carved out, or historic structures and resources have been sectioned out like SB 9 has done. So if I can share my screen, Wendy, is that permissible at this point?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Show you a couple of slides I took from a webinar. This is the art of looking at slides and taking a photograph of a slide when somebody's doing a webinar.
Do it all the time.
Yeah. I've got it down to a pretty good skill here. So here's what you can see is about the Housing Crisis Act, statewide emergency. What it required us to do as a city, it required us to create an application form prior to the beginning of the law. What happens is under this SB 330 for a residential project is somebody can lock in the laws and statutes and fees in effect the time that they submit what's called a preliminary application. And then within 180 days, they get to submit a formal application, and that's when the clock starts on the hearings and the like. Now, I've left out a little bit of the storyline, but the point here is that when that preliminary application is submitted, when we determine that the application is complete, you can see here that there's a historic determination required at the time of completeness. And it also, this law does not override CEQA or the Coastal Act. Of course, we're not subject to the Coastal Act, but what it tells me here is just preliminarily, without getting into the weeds, that the ability of SB 330 is basically let's build housing, folks, and don't try to get in the way to stop it. That's my general message. We can come back.
But if it says that it doesn't override CEQA, is that to our advantage?
Well, you have to complete CEQA for every project. I'm sorry. And then here you can see that even with making final decisions, you've got to do it within so many days after, whether it's an EIR or 60 days after the neg deck. You don't have to do them all at the same time. But CEQA must not be ignored, I guess is what this is saying. And in that, I'm going to see if I can find the right one. I'm probably not going to guess right. Oh, I did guess right. If you can see right here, remember I mentioned just a minute ago about a preliminary application? You can see that section number 8 they just need to identify if any of the property or portion of the property is in a very high fire hazard severity zone. It doesn't say development is prohibited in these locations. They just have to disclose where the project is. So what I read by here when we talk about this next slide right there, number 9, they need to disclose whether this project is in any historic or cultural resource area. And so it's not a matter of saying you can't develop there. They just want to know what it is and what impact this housing project is going to have on the community. So yeah, there's a lot of analysis to be done. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope that clears it up.
Well, thank you. That's helpful.
So I have a question. I'm sorry.
Okay, Commissioner Randolph, it's fine.
Okay. So I understand that. I understand the need for housing. It's significant. what would have happened on a project like the Masonavi House, for example? I'm just picking that because a lot of us know about that property. I wasn't on the commission at the time that the property was restored, but I was very involved in the restoration of the property. It did not take 5 meetings to get that thing figured out. And so if a historic resource comes up that is under review for restoration, or, well, the Masonavi Cottage is really a case in point.
Yeah, this would not be an issue because SB 330 is talking about somebody who wants to build housing.
Okay, so then we go back to which makes total sense. It just makes total sense. If a property comes up for restoration or that a historic resource, then what rules apply there? I guess that's part of the question for me that will help me think about what options there are for different commissions.
Well, and I want to interject. Isn't there's 2 regulations we're talking about here that I'm aware of. One is the SB 330, the other is SB 9, and they have different implications. Is that correct?
Yeah,
They are.
Go ahead. Sorry, Christine, go ahead.
So SB 9 is not a discretionary process. So a discretionary process is any permit that is issued by the Design Review Commission, Planning Commission, City Council. What SB 9 does is it's a straight to building permit. So a building permit is what we consider a ministerial permit. So under SB 9, there's no CEQA, there's no design review. Everything is done administratively.
Thank you.
But the point here is that with SB 9, a property owner who chooses to either build multiple units on their property or subdivide, they can do that. But if you're in a historic district, you can't. The benefits of SB 9 are not available to you.
Okay, that's very important. So, like, think about the Blue Wing Inn. Think about the Castagnaso property. Think about the Depot Hotel or the barracks or whatever. So,
if I could just add in real quick, some of the criticism up and down the state is being aimed at by affordable housing builders, that those jurisdictions that have passed urgency ordinances or regular ordinances, or even talked about designating the whole city a historic district, so that SB 9 is not applicable. The Attorney General is having a look at that. Now, whether we come under the fire, I don't know. I don't believe so. I think we've acted as a city in a quite meaningful way, wanting to preserve our historic identity, but at the same time allowing the provisions of SB 9 to be applicable.
Yeah.
Well, and I will say just that we are going to run into people who are deliberately trying to trigger 5 meetings so they can ramrod things through and do what they want. I mean, I hate to say that, but I deal with a lot of policy work in my day-to-day job, and I know that there will be people who use it as a leverage because they recognize, oh, gee, I can get one more, I can do whatever I want. To me, that's a real threat or real consideration. That's what I am concerned about, because the inadvertent ones that have good intent is not so much the effort. It's the ones who are going to use this as a way to leverage through their own agenda and get rid of our sweet historic homes, bulldoze and put up what they want because they got 5 meetings. That's where I see a concern.
And I can assure you that developers will not waive that right for the 5 hearings.
Yeah.
I think that's the lens that staff has been looking at. So we're counting backwards. So, if we have an appeal up to City Council and maybe that takes 2, sometimes Planning Commission takes 2, then we have, one other.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
I think we have enough to kind of take home right now and go play with our toys and get back to you, and we can help formulate.
I think it's been a very productive meeting, and I think what we should do now is kind of full circle what I was describing earlier, is to have some kind of a staff recommendation of here's some things we could see as structures that might be applicable to this situation, either as joint meetings, subcommittee meetings, designated persons from this attending other meetings, whatever that might look like, and then we could have further discussion upon that. But I think overall there's been some really good conversation tonight. Is there any other questions from commissioners to staff or to David for this evening that is unclear? Anybody? I mean, I think we kind of. Commissioner Jeremy, you look like you're unsettled. Do you have any questions?
No, I'm fine. Thank
Okay. Hearing none, I mean, I guess we just, there isn't really a chance to make a motion at this stage other than to continue the conversation, right?
Yep.
To the next meeting, and then let's review it and see where we stand. And we will also have hopefully some other perspectives from the commissioners who are not here today, and we'll further the conversation. So, I mean, I think we're all aligned in our interests and our goals. It's just navigating the regulations and the time and things we're being faced with. So definitely some concerns. Overall, I think staff's done a wonderful job. David, thank you for participating tonight. Appreciate it. I have some more clarity on what we're looking for, and let's continue the conversation, right? Okay.
See you next month.
If that's it, there's any other questions, any other items, discussions, or updates we need to add?
Sure, I have an issues update.
Okay.
So I hope you all received my email that we are going to have a joint tree committee, design review, and historic preservation commission meeting on March 1st.
Yep.
I'm anticipating that meeting is going to be in person. However, the tree committee members have been meeting remotely throughout COVID, so the tree committee members may have the option to Zoom in, but all of the design review commissioners, if the council adopts that resolution tomorrow night, will need to be there in person at the council chambers. And so that, I think that's it for me.
Yeah, that's
Christine
awesome.
or David, do you have any updates?
No.
I just always want to say that when people say, do you have any issues updated? I always want to say, I have issues.
But they stay the same, right? Not updated. Okay. So I believe that's it. Anybody have any comments before we close the meeting this evening? No, good discussion. I welcome it. I look forward to continuing the conversation. So the meeting will be formally adjourned 8:07. Thank you, everybody. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Night.
Thank you.